All right. Can you folks hear me? Yeah, it was too noisy because my speaker was on, so it was like mic to speaker to mic, there was like a loop. But I've disabled my speakers now, so it should be better. Okay, awesome. There's also like a lag, I guess, between when I see your comments. So yeah, if I respond a little late, sorry, it's because I actually get your messages a little late. Okay. Let's see. Not clear though. Okay, is the voice not clear or is the video not clear? Looking if I can bump up the display. Yeah, seems to be on the highest. Control room. I can increase my audio. Okay. It's fine for me. There's some echoes there. Okay. The echo might be there because I'm in a slightly empty room. Wait, where's my, oh yeah. Yeah, this room doesn't have a lot of things yet, so it kind of be a little echoey until I fill it up. Okay, so I guess I'll start now. Okay. The idea with this whole thing is that there is a React meetup in Bangalore, and it kind of happens every month. So somebody backed out on the last minute, which means I had to give a talk, and third, because it's very last minute, I'm still kind of practicing and making up my talk. So that is what you folks will see. The talk is basically about refactoring. So it's if you have some good code, how can you make it even better? And I try to look at some of the common code smells in React, right? And I say the code smells and not bugs because they're probably not problems right now. I mean, I guess because you wrote it and it works in production, so I mean, you must have tested it. But there could be problems in the future. Like you change it or somebody doesn't know the context behind it. So this is really about writing more maintainable code than it is anything else. Cool. So I have a few examples. Is this for JS4? No, this is actually for React Bangalore, which is like a meetup that's happening tomorrow. Should we code? Okay, somebody commented. Raja Raghav said, should we code along on something like Code Sandbox? That's a brilliant idea, but sadly I didn't think of it. So I don't have the Code Sandbox ready. But that's something I'll experiment with in the future. Sounds like a pretty cool idea. Thanks. For now, you just look at me code. Hopefully, it's not too boring. Cool. So I'm gonna start very easy. There's this example where it's a lot of spaghetti weird code, and then we'll refactor it, try to make it simple. And all of these examples have spaghetti, dynamic lists, controlled import, password form, and drill. All of these are ascending order. I'm going to open this file spaghetti. I'm going to explain what this code does. Let me put my face somewhere else. Cool. Yeah, so this is basically like a form. And inside a form, you have two modes. So it says your profile, and it has username edit. And then I can edit it, and it becomes an input. And then I can write my name, and then I can save it. It will change, like hypothetically change my username. Of course, this doesn't actually do anything because it's just pseudocode. You will also notice that the edit button changes. It goes from edit to save and toggles between them. The code for this is what you'd expect your classic React code to be. It has let me bump this up. Okay, it has a label which says your profile. Then I have a mode. So I have the edit mode, and then I have a view mode. So when you say edit mode, it shows you this input and the button with save. And otherwise, it's assuming that the other mode is the view mode, and it opens this. It puts this div with the name and shows the edit button. Right? And then I have this toggle class, which is not really useful. The key here is that I'm grouping them by function. Like when it's in edit, do these two things. When it's in view, do these two things. Now that's kind of the first problem with this, that then you want to add another functionality here. Like for example, we say username and we put something else such as organization, right? And that's something that you have to remember, that there is one for the edit mode, there's one for the view mode. We're grouping them by feature, not by the form. And so that's something we can very quickly fix by kind of separating the inputs together and the buttons together. So I'll start by just copy pasting this. And so I've created two of these. In the second one, I'm going to delete all of the inputs. I'm only interested in keeping the buttons. And in the first one, I'll delete the buttons and only keep the username stuff. Cool, so it's back to the same state where it still works. So we know we're not breaking things, that's useful. And now you see this React fragment is actually useless because we're only wrapping one. You typically use React fragment when you want to wrap two React components, because in JSX, React wouldn't let you, or more like JSX wouldn't let you to put two siblings without putting a wrapper. So React fragment is like a transparent wrapper. Otherwise, you'll have an extra DOM like a div or something. Cool. So now I've split them into two, and this part talks about the username between username changing and username show, like edit and view. And this part only talks about the button. So now if we're supposed to introduce a new feature, like I said, org in between, we'll put it here where we put two modes, right? So it's nicely segregated. Next up, what I'd like to do is also move this out. So this is something that not a lot of people realize, but because JSX is actually not HTML, it's just JavaScript, you can assign it to variable. So before I do this return statement, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say const action, and I'm going to put what is the action in this, right? Like is it edit, is it save? Actually, let me say let action, and then I'm going to pull this part and write it in something which doesn't look as cryptic, right? Like this syntax itself kind of is hard to follow. There are like two sad spaces over here, and you have a question mark. Like conditionals are not the most readable. So instead, I'm going to say, oops, instead I'm going to say if top-script mode is edit. I'm essentially just converting this into a more comfortable, like a syntax that is more beginner friendly, which is the if else, right? You can also make this a switch if there are a bunch of options. And yeah, so now in action, I'm actually going to assign this. Now this is the part where most people kind of don't get it. Where because JSX is JavaScript, you can actually assign JSX text, or what do you call JSX stuff, to a JavaScript variable. And then I can use the JavaScript variable over here. And now you see this, all of this still works, but it's really nicer to look at, right? And let me do the same for the username part of the word too. So I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to paste it on the top. I'm saying let username, and I'm going to say if it's the edit part, then username is the same as this input. Awesome. And then I try the else case. Otherwise, the username part of my app is just this text. Right. And I don't know about you, but this looks a lot more readable to me, right? Like the classic if else case. You can drop it in the comments. If you think this doesn't really help, let me know. This might be a little stretching it. And then in this, I can actually just say username, right? So I really like doing this because in the return statement, somebody can look at the code and say, okay, there's the form, there's the label, there's the username stuff, and then there's the action stuff. And the action can be twofold. which is defined over here, right? So that's the first example. That's like create like changing conditional spaghetti into something that we can actually all understand easily. Cool. Then let's look at dynamic list. Okay, I have 30 minutes for this talk, and I spent around 7 minutes on just the first example, which is not a good sign. So I might have to cut a few things out. Okay, is there a performance benefit to this? That's a good question. Yeah, I don't think so, because the only extra thing that we're doing here is assigning it to, like, we're doing the same if checks that we had to do. The only additional thing we're doing is we're assigning it to a variable. So that might have like, I don't know, like a nanosecond of performance degradation, like worse performance, but it's like, doesn't really matter. It's too tiny for you to care. Code maintainability is like the biggest thing over here, and probably more important than micro performance anyways. Cool. Let's look at dynamic lists. Okay, I'm gonna move my face around again. That's confusing. Over here, I have this example where I have item 1, item 2. When I click this, I add another item. Now, some of you might have already seen this. I think I've talked about this example before. But the core idea here is that when you look at this list in your DevTools actually highlights what changes. So when I say add more, you'll see this li item actually glows up, right? Let me add another. Right, so you see one more item came here, the li glows up, it's DevTools trying to tell you that something new has happened here, right? Let me refresh. To look at the code of this, I start with an array, I put it in state, and then I say add more. Add more basically pushes an item to the end of the list, and then I set state, which will actually render the list. In the return statement, in the render part, I loop through each one of these. I say state.items.map, and I put all of these on an item, right? And name is the actual name, and I'm using the index of the array as the key, right? And then there's the button which you click, which runs the function. Now, on the first look of it, it looks pretty nice, it works perfectly, but there is a code smell here, right? And again, I say code smell and not bug, because right now it works, it's perfect. Code smell basically means it might become a bug in the future, or might become a pain to maintain. That's a nice line, pain to maintain later. And that's because this rendering part assumes that items can only be added at the end. If items can be added to the top or in between, this key is not really going to help. Let me show you how. If I say unshift instead of push, which means add to the top of the array, and let me focus on something. So you see these two items, I'm going to add one more. It goes to the top, and look what happens in the DevTools. I'm going to add one more, and you see all of these get highlighted, which means all of these are getting re-rendered, right? And that's kind of weird, because we like to use React because it does the virtual DOM voodoo magic, and it's supposed to be optimized for DOM rendering and stuff, but this is obviously not, right? It's doing the other thing, it's rendering everything. React is not being smart here. And that's kind of because we're giving it the wrong key, right? So we're saying index is the key. When you add something to the top of the array, all of the indexes change, right? Everything shifts by one, which means if we give React a bad index, React not only will not optimize things, it will actually make it worse. So that's why you should always give a key which is unique. In our case, the name is actually unique. So I'm going to put name, and then let's see what happens, right? Another fun part is the key doesn't have to be an integer. It doesn't have to be a number. You can have a string, you can have a hash, as long as it's small and unique. It's pretty cool for React. So yeah, now we have a unique key. So now let's see what happens. I'm going to add one more item to the top, and you'll see only the first item is getting highlighted, right? So now React can understand that because the array shifted, but the key was the same, React says, okay, I'm going to reuse this li item, not create another. So that's a pretty tiny li fancy trick for you with key, right? It's more like a tip that don't be lazy with key. Try to come up with a unique key. Okay, there's a comment. Yeah, I always keep this example in mind while maintaining keys. Gold example. Yeah, I saw this. I'm not sure where, but it's a really cool example. It always reminds me to not mess with my keys. That's not to say that you should not use index. If there are cases where you are sure that you will only add things to the bottom, and this feature will never change, then it's safe to use index because that is the unique key in that case, right? So I wouldn't make this an ESLint rule and not make everyone, like not force it on people, just be wary of what key is for and what it can do. Cool. All right, now we're rushing. Next one is controlled input. Oh, I really like this example. Cool. So I have this list on the left, right? I have this sidebar thing going on, and I can click on cats, and it says rename cats to something, right? And I can say rename cats to kittens. And I save it, it changes the texture, right? And that's pretty much what it does. And I can say cats, dogs, birds, these are the categories, you can rename them. Now, how this works is it's a constructor, you have categories over here which are rendered in the sidebar. Submit is what actually changes this. That is kind of boring code, you don't need to care. Side nav is what renders this, boring code. This main part is what we're interested in. We render a form, and we have a form component. And let me again drag myself out. Form has an onSubmit and a selected. So we pass the selected state to the form, and we only do this because we actually want to show rename cats or rename dogs here, right? Let's look at the form component. Form component again is pretty tiny. It basically has the form. It has a div which says this text rename props.selected to. It has an input with input type text and a button to hit save. Now, on the surface, this looks easy, but there is a lot of hidden things that I haven't implemented, which we'll try to now. Cool. The first thing to implement here is when you say cats, you actually have to type it again to rename it. Like good UI would mean that it auto fills this part, right? When I say cats, it should fill cats here. When I say dogs, it should fill dogs in the input. So the way to do that in React, and this is like, I'm going to go on one implementation and then say why that's probably not the best implementation. So even if you recognize what's going wrong, jump in that comment box and type what am I doing wrong, right? If you recognize the bug or the code smell. Cool. Yeah, so the way to add default initial text into this is to use this prop called default value, right? And in our case, we want default value to be props.selected, right? Perfect. So now you'll see I say cats and I see cats here, and I can type cats too, save it, it changes, right? There's one caveat here. When I switch from cats to dogs, this doesn't, like the rename part changes, but this doesn't change. And that's because default value only initializes once, right? That's why it's called default value. So even though your props selected has changes, but the input is still hanging on to that value because the input wasn't re-rendered, right? It's the same input that React is using. So in default value, so basically means we can't probably use default value. So when you want to control a value in React, you basically say, let it be the value, right? Everyone's probably done this. And the moment you do value, React will throw an error at you. So when I put this, React will say, you failed prop type, you provided a value prop without putting an on change, right? And why React is doing that is because now we control this value, right? So when I type, you can't see this, but I'm typing. So when I type, nothing changes because the value is hard-coded to props.selected. That's why React advises us to also add an on change so that we can pass a function and actually control this value. To add an on change means I have to write an on change function. So this cannot be a form, right? I have to put this cannot be a functional component. It has to be a class component to be able to do that. I'll do that. I'll create this into a form.react extend React component, right? And it needs a render. And let me just copy this inside render. Delete the on change for now. And okay, we have an extra. Props is not defined. Yep, props becomes this dot props. And cool. Okay, let's see if everything works. Nice, awesome. And now you see this part is changing, right? Because we have the values. So when we change this, the value comes from selected. But you can't change it by typing, which is stupid. So now we're going to create an onChange for that. Create an onChange function. OnChange gets an event, and we're going to bind it to the input, the onChange. And you can either do bind stuff, or you can just use the arrow function format so that you don't have to do it. If you did not know this trick, just please start using it. It's a peace of mind. Okay. The value inside this input is going to be event.target.value, and then I can set this somewhere. So if I'm controlling the input, it means I cannot use it from this .props.select. I have to put it from state. So let me first define the default state equal to the value. It's this .props.selected, and then I can say this .state.value. Awesome. And in onChange, I can change this value. This .state value is event. Close the bracket. Should work. Okay. Now when you say cats, you can type it, and it's typing through a long loop where you had hit the onChange. The onChange goes to this function. It reads the value from the event and puts it in state, and then because value is bound to state, it re-renders the input and puts the value there. Awesome. So this works, and when we switch to docs, it doesn't really work. So we're kind of back to square one, right? It did not really solve the problem. And that's because when selected state changes, it's passed to props, but your constructor or your initial state value is only defined once, right? So that's not going to work either. So if you want to change the state from the, when your props change, if you want to change the state as well, what's the best way to do it, right? I'm going to wait 5 seconds till the comments come. So type in the comments, what's the best way to actually handle this scenario? I'm going to jump in and say it component will receive props. Right, I think that's not. Let me quickly Google that to see if I'm making a typo. Awesome. Will receive this. And component will receive. Okay, I don't even remember what it receives. Oof, it also says don't use component receive props. It says pass an onChange method as a prop. That's interesting. If you pass an onChange method as a prop, you can actually put it on. Oh, that's an interesting solution. Which is you're saying you can actually pull this state up into the parent, because the parent has information about selected and the value both. That's a pretty good solution. Yeah. I'm not a super big fan of that solution because it also means that you will pull up logic that should be in the form, but now is in the parent, which also controls the sidebar and the form, right? It's like one thing is trying to do too many. Some people already kind of know the answer. I'm very happy that you folks already know. Good. So I can keep going this path where I can say next props and I can pull it from there. But an easier way to do this, and effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to say when the selected state changes, just reject the form and give me a new form, right? Like reset all the values. If you were using some logic bound to the save button as well, you'll want to refresh the save button and just bind it to the new values, right? And that's why you can kind of delete all of this stuff. You don't need all of this. We can keep using default value, which is props.selected as before, and just add a key on the form, right? And I'm putting this as this .props.selected. But what this tells React is that when props.selected changes, re-render the entire form, right? Lose any of the state that you had and just give me a new one, right? So when I say this, and you see, we only added this one line and everything else kind of works. We don't have to jump into a bunch of life cycles. And because I can now, I'm going to convert this back into function component instead of a class component, because I just like function components more. Classes always confuse me. Cool. And then this dot props becomes just props. So cool. Yeah. So now we're back to our first thing that we had, and we've only added this one thing. It's this key prop selector, right? So this is a key, again, is a super useful thing. You can protect React from doing something messed up, but you can also inform React that when this happens, just flush the entire thing. I don't care. Give me a new one, right? Super powerful, but you also have to use it responsibly. Awesome. Cool. Next example. We're on to 25 minutes. Okay. I think I'm going to overshoot the time a little. Let's see. Somebody has a laugh emoji. Okay. Password form. So password form, again, I'm recycling one of my old examples here. This is a password form. Let me also open it up. Cool. Small file. There's an on submit, which is boring. You don't need to care. This part, what it does, it has a form. It has a label called change password. It has an input, and then it has a button. Right. That's it. Now, what I want to do in this is, it lets me hit save even when there is no content, right? Which is kind of silly. Like, you have to add something. In the case of password, you probably want to disable the save button until you have 8 or whatever characters, right? So I want to implement that there should be at least 8 characters or 6 characters. So to actually limit this. There's a comment. Yeah, please do. This is interesting. Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. Cool. So the way you would do this password thing is, again, you need to control state, right? So I want to check how many characters are there in the input to disable or not disable the button. So I always like to put the props first, or the JSX attribute first, before I write the function. So I want disabled here. So I'm going to say button disabled. It's going to come from this dot state dot disabled. Of course, we don't have that yet, so I'm just going to put it true here and see if it works. Yep, this is the disabled style. And I need to put an on change here, which will have a function on change. Which I can write here. On change is a function. Now, again, this will get an event, which will have the value, right? And because I want disable to come from state, I need to define an initial state. Disabled is, by default, if there is no content, it should also be disabled true, right? And then I can make this dot state dot disabled. All right, awesome. Yeah, so by default it's false. In the on change now, I'm going to bring on change on. In the on change, what I want to do is, I want to say if event.target.value, this gives me the string inside the input. I'm going to check the length. If that is greater than equal to 8 characters, then I'm going to say this dot set state disabled is false, right? You don't need to disable it. Otherwise, if it's less than that, it should be disabled. Awesome. Let's see if this works. I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Awesome. Works. I think I can refactor this into something nicer. I can say disable and put the logic here. I can put this here. It's not this dot first, but this dot first. Perfect. Now this works because this gives you a true or false value, and then that is set to disabled. So I can squeeze more and less times. Okay, still works. Oh wait, no. Oh, I have the condition, or it should be less than 8. Then this is true and disabled. Ah, nice. Disabled by default, gets enabled later. Perfect. Now, this seems like a feature that I would want on multiple forms. So I want to abstract it outside this password form into a different component so that I can reuse it later. So, which means I want basically something like a higher order component. Now, to do a higher order component, what I want is I want to enhance this password form. So I want to say enhance smart password form is equal to a function which I can give it, and then pass my dumb password form, right? So this function will take the dumb password dumb password component and give you a smart password component, and that is the one I would render, right? Everything breaks. I need to define what this is. Good. So it's a function which takes a component and it returns another component which is supposed to be smart. So I'm going to say let's create a smart component which extends React.component. Okay, this is a class, right? And then inside the render function of this, I just want to return the component that was there. I want to render it. Let's see. Okay, now let's see if this works. Render, return. Oh, and I of course have to return this smart component. Oh, nice. We're back. Cool. So what I've done until now is this is a function which is a higher order component. It takes a dumb component, creates a new smart one, and returns that. And inside the render, I'm just rendering the component. This will also have some props that are passed to it. So somebody will use this and want to pass props to it. So I should just forward all of the props that come ahead, right? I'm using the spread operator and I'm saying take everything, forward it along. Cool. And now what we want to do, we want all of this logic, reusable logic here. So I'm going to cut this part of state, the constructor part, put it in my smart component. On change, I can actually steal from here, put it here. And then I just need these two, right? So I moved all the state stuff into my smart component, but I need to pass them onto the actual component that uses it. So I can say pass disabled as a prop by this.state.disabled, and also pass on change by saying this.onChange. Right? So I'm taking the component, like the dumb component you give me, I'm rendering it and adding these two extra props, which means this password form now has two additional props called disabled. So I can say this.props disabled and on change, this.props on change. Let's see if this still works. Disabled by default and starts working after you add it, right? So this is a pretty cool way where you can actually take something and like add the logic and give extra functionality. So anyone who wants to use this smart functionality now just needs to wrap their component in a smart form, and they'll get two extra props. They can use it disabled, and the input that they want to add it to, they'll put an on change. Let me know if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job at explaining how this higher order component works. Okay, now let's talk about, this seems like a good solution, but there are still a little code smells, like some code smells here. The biggest one is this props.disabled is a very generic thing, right? If somebody else also wants to pass a disabled prop, maybe to disable the input, right? If the parent of this component wants to pass some props, they'll just do it, right? And then you'll have conflict where this disabled prop and that disabled prop do the same thing. And that's going to be difficult. Let me show an example. I'm going to, the parent where I have all of these, yeah, password is the one. I'm going to say disabled is false, right? This is what the parent wants to pass. And that will make this button become disabled false, even though we have this whole smart logic that we've written. So people have different ways of making this not conflict. One of the ways is to not just name it something generic, but add like a smart form underscore type thing. Like this is a very BEM inspired thing that you add something so that becomes unique, and you add smart form here so that this, now when you look at props.smartform, we know it's coming from the smart form component and it's not coming from the parent. So that's like one way of doing it. It's not my favorite way of doing it. This also fails in a few cases when you have nested stuff, right? So if you were using, this is a weird example, but if you're using a form inside a form or any other example where you have a higher order component, both of them will say smart form.onChange or smart form.disabled, right? And then again, you can't tell which layer of higher order component did it come from. So what we're really complaining, or what I'm really complaining about here, is not having a scope, right? All of these things are getting muddled into props. So to create a scope in JavaScript, you usually just create a new function scope, right? Function gives you scope. So if I could render a new scope right here, right? Outside these two, I could render a new function scope that would solve my problem. And that is kind of this the thinking behind render props, where you can pass a children as a function to this higher to this render prop component. Let me show you how that would look like. Essentially, we still have the same thing, but we don't have a higher order component. I can get rid of this. We just have a kind of like a wrapper component. So I'm going to create a wrapper component here. I don't need this nonsense. I just have this component. And instead of rendering the component, it just renders whatever children it gets, right? And it requires you to have, or it asks you to put a function inside this render block, right? Let me show you how that would actually look. So in my render, what I will do, I would put this, and I would put this at the closing place, right? And inside this is JSX, right? So I can, inside JSX, I can say this return this dot props dot children, right? And it will render whatever you give it. But to create a new scope, I want it to be a function, right? So I can put these two block thingies, put a function, and from the function, we return all of these. Syntax, it's a function. Where does this function end? Awesome. What's the problem? The BR is the problem. Ooh, now that I'm wrapping these, I need to wrap this in something. Let me just wrap them in a div. Sweet. Cool. So now, now when I make this a function, I can accept scoped properties, right? So what I want to accept is actually these two values, disabled and on change. But I can say just give me smart data, right? Just like one object, and from inside my smart component, I'm not going to render the children. I'm going to call that function and give it an object as smart data. So I'm going to say disable is this dot state dot disable. The same thing that I was giving earlier, just that instead of as props, I'm giving them as object and calling this function, right? It's kind of weird and spooky, but it makes sense. And then instead of here, I can say use smart data dot on change and smart data dot disable, right? So I've created a new scope essentially. This is not props, this is not state, this is in between everything. I put a new scope, right? And I can make this a little prettier by using restructuring. I can say just give me on change and disabled out of this, and then I can also remove it. Okay. So now when you see this disabled, you know it's coming from this wrapper because you have a function here, and it's not coming from props. So not only you don't have conflicts, but you can also have scope, which is awesome. Cool. This is probably the most difficult example in all of this. So even if you don't get it, it's okay. The core idea is that to create a new scope, instead of passing children, we're passing a function that returns JSX. And from the render prop component, we're actually not rendering children, we're calling the function which will render children. And then we can pass whatever data we want. Cool, okay, final one. How are we doing on time? Not so good, we're too high up. Cool. Okay, let's look at the last one. So this is an example of, I also like this example a lot. So in this example, what we're doing, we have a username, a password, and a confirm field. Is this pattern referred to as HLCs? What is this pattern called? Scope slots in view. I'm not sure what scope slots in view are, but the pattern is called render props. And the idea, people used to call it render props. I think the more current or more technically correct thing is to call it function as a child, right? Because we're not passing JSX as children, we're actually passing a function. Is this pattern referred to as HLCs? I've seen the HLC pattern a lot more commonly. The previous one I showed you, where you have a function which enhances a component, that is the HLC, because it's a higher order component, just like higher order functions, which are functions that take a function, return something. HLCs, higher order components, are functions that take a component and return an enhanced component. But this approach, which I changed to, is called function as a child instead. It's under the whole category of render props. Okay. The next one, the last example is this. So I have a sign up form, I have username, password, confirm, and I have a save button, right? If you look at the code for this feature, it looks something like this. You have a profile form, and then it has a form inside it, and this is like a custom React component. It has a label, and then it has these three text input. Two of them say type password, and then I have a save button, right? And then I just have this example wrapper, which says drill example, right? Which says props, and it says profile font. Oh, okay, I got your question now. You're saying, is this pattern preferred over higher order components? Yeah, it's actually preferred over higher order components a lot because you have less conflicts and it's a lot easier to debug because with higher order components, you're introducing a layer in between, but it's a pretty transparent layer, right? And you can't really see which props are forwarded, which props are not. With this function as a child approach, you can see the block and you also create your scope. So there's no conversation about conflicting props or forwarding props because we're not dealing with props. We're saying new scope. Props will keep working as they do. Cool. I hope that answers your question. Okay, back to drill example. So example, I just rendered this profile and I'll tweak this a little more later. To show what these forms and all of these components are, these are the reusable components that will be used across multiple forms, multiple files. Form is pretty straightforward. It's a form with last name form, which just renders all of the children that you pass in. Text input gives you a text. By default, it's type text. If you give it a type, for example, we say type password, it will respect that. It takes a placeholder, it takes this password props. It goes for value, has a class name, and this proxies all of the props. And now what we really want to do in this case is we want to say, I want to create another example where I can disable the entire form, right? So in profile form, I want to say disable is true, right? And it should disable all the fields. How you would actually implement this is you'll say, okay, I get disabled from props. I have to drop it to my text input. So I'll say disabled is props.disabled. And then I'll also pass it to all of these, like this guy, and the button, right? And that would mean that when I pass disabled, all of these will get disabled, turned on or turned off, sorry. Right? And of course, you have to kind of pass it all the way, right? So this is like, people call it prop drilling because you wanted this to reach, for example, the button, which is 2-3 layers deep, and you have to pass it through the layers. So I had to pass it in profile form, I had to pass it in through the form to text input or button, right? I have to keep passing it. And so let's try to make this example slightly nicer, right? I don't really want to pass disable to each. I just know that it has to be passed to all of them because if the parent is disabled, all of the children should be disabled. So I'm going to delete this part and instead try to write this code in form. So this disable comes to profile. I'm just going to put it on the parent. And the parent is now responsible to pass it to all of its children, right? I don't really have to do profile form. Good. Sorry, disabled is props.disabled. You can just write disabled instead of disabled true. Oh yeah, but I also want to say disabled false, right? To quickly switch between the two. But yeah, you're right. I can just say disable. That works. Good. Inside this profile form, I'm saying form disabled. I'm passing this a prop, and I want form to take care of all of its children. So let's go to the form component. Right now, we're just rendering all the children. I want to be able to tweak these children, right? Right now, it's just taking everything from props.children. So there's a way of tweaking React components. You can tweak them on the fly and pass an extra prop. It's called React.clone element, where you can take an existing React element and pass it extra properties, right? So we use that. And to loop through all of these children, we're going to use React dot. We can use props.children.map, but I don't know, there's some reason for it not to work. I'll go back to it in 5 minutes. But the canonical, the documented way of doing this is you say react.children.map, right? And then you pass the array of children, so you say props.children, and now you can give a function here. Inside this function, you get each child, and then you're supposed to return whatever tweaked child. So tweaked child for us, we already know. We're going to clone that element and clone this child and add the extra property, which is, you guessed it, props.disable. Right? And then we render these children. So, and you see everything is disabled. Awesome. So what we're doing here is we're taking the form and we're saying, I'm going to loop through each of these children. And for each of them, I'm going to create another one, clone them, and add this extra property based on whatever is given to my props. And you can see this works if I remove this disabled. Everything goes back to enable. I can add this disabled back, and it's disabled, right? And this is pretty cool. This is like a beautiful way of abstracting logic. And I'm saying these are reusable components, which you can write once in your application, and people wouldn't really have to re-implement this logic every time, right? All of your forms can just use this extra functionality. But again, as everything, there are problems with this. There is a code smell here, which is when you loop through children, you only loop through one layer, right? So let me say there is an example which is I'm adding a prop which says show password, right? And I'm passing it as false. Now, what I want to do in this is let me remove this label. What show password should do is, if show password is false, it should hide these two and only let you change the username, right? Could you please quickly explain about the context API if you have time? Surprise, surprise, this example will actually use the context API, so you're in luck. Awesome. So yeah, show passwords. So I want to hide these if show password is false, which means I can say, what is that? 8936184 something views. Oh my god, I'm not sure what you are seeing, dude, because I'm seeing 14 views. So there are only 14 people watching it. I'm not sure your I think your YouTube is kind of getting buggy. Anywho, I'm gonna say props.showPasswords. If showPasswords is there, then I want to show this. I want to wrap this in a div, and if show password is not there, just render none. Right? So what this logic basically says is, if show password is true, show these two fields, otherwise render null. And you see instantly it breaks, and that's because we're not handling a null case, we're trying to clone whatever is here. So if, let's just handle it, if child is not there or is null, we just want to return null. We don't want to do the cloning stuff. And perfect, so we're back now. Good. Show passwords, and if you say show password is true, it will show these fields. Now see what happens when I say disable true. The moment you say disabled, you see username is disabled, this button is disabled, but these two things are not disabled. And it's because when you're looping through all of these, this gets a disabled, this gets a disabled prop, and the div gets a disabled prop in between. Right? Where is my div? yeah, all of this loop only happens at one layer. It doesn't go nested into the children's children or the grandchildren, right? So this is where it kind of breaks, and we want our reusable components to be able to abstract this disabled logic, right? You shouldn't have to, as someone who's using this form, you shouldn't have to know that there is this extra prop thing that I have to know and add disabled here, right? So that's why I don't like this. This is where the map and clone thing kind of fails. The solution here is to use context API. So what the context API lets you do is it lets you set the context, and anywhere inside that tree, children, grandchildren, their children, anywhere you can actually access that field, which is what we want here, right? We don't want this to break if there is another layer of nesting. So to use the context API, I'm going to delete all of this weird logic that I wrote and just keep using props.children. And so the way context API works is you can call react.create context, and it will give you a pair. It will give you a context pair. There's a question: do you prefer using null or using and for conditional rendering? Oh, you're asking if I use this and null or if I use and then I don't need to use this. I'm somehow biased towards the conditional, but I don't have a reason for it. I think it's just personal style. I don't know if there's a difference in performance or maintenance. Okay, back to the context pair. So when you create a context pair, when you call react.create context, you can give a default value and it will give you a context pair. I'm going to restructure this, and it gives you these two things: a provider and a consumer. Provider is where you can set the values. Consumer is where you can grab those values, right, as the main test. So I'm going to use the provider and wrap it around these children. I'm just putting it inside the font. What is my highlighted? Okay. Yeah, so I'm saying everything in the font is wrapped by a provider now, and I can put a value here. Value is, I'm putting in, I could have also put just one value, but I like to put objects so that I can extend it. So the object I'm putting here is disabled, is props.disabled, right? So now all the children inside this can have access to this value using this consumer. So let's use this consumer in the text input. Text input, I'm wrapping the whole thing in a consumer input, right? Okay. And now you have to kind of guess what would React folks do? Would they pass this as a prop, or would they pass this as a render prop, right? And because we saw that a prop, like a higher order component, doesn't work as nicely as a render prop, so they're obviously smart people, so they decided to use this. So inside the consumer, you have to pass a function where you get the, let me write like this. You pass a function where you get the context as the first parameter. What did I do? Okay. And then you can return your active thing from here. And now I can use this context to use context.disable. Lovely. Now you can see all of these are disabled. Let me do that with the button as well, and then recap. Instead of just rendering the button, I'm wrapping it in the consumer. Whoops. In the consumer. Consumer expects the internals to be a function. So I put this block, I put a function, the function gets this one prop, the context, and then I can return my button inside it, and instead of using props, I can use the context. Right. And now you see this, all of this works. Even though we have a layer of nesting here, it doesn't matter because context goes through the layers. It's like an invisible way of keep passing props till the last child. And you can create as many pairs of these you want. I'm creating one over here for the form and all of its children. If you're using multiple forms, you probably want to create multiple pairs of these as well. So, yeah, so if you're a provider consumer, you can wrap your parent, the one that starts the context tree, with the provider. You set the value there, and all of these children inside it, no matter what you put, can access the value by wrapping their contents inside a consumer and changing it to a function where you get the context and then you can use it instead of using props, right? And that's kind of the whole story about drilling and context. Cool, what's the time? Wow, I went on for 45 minutes, almost 40 minutes. It's supposed to be a 30-minute talk. So I don't think I can speak faster or explain things faster because I'm scared if I rush through things, I'll not do a good job at explaining it. So I'll probably have to cut one of these examples. So just like comment which example didn't really feel as interesting or didn't really feel like you learned something, and I'll probably do 1, 2, 3, 4 of these instead of the 5 I'm doing right now. Okay, that's all I have for the thingy. I'm going to stop this broadcast. I don't know how to stop it. Oh, there we go. All right. See you folks soon, I guess. I like doing this. I'll probably do one again next week. Bye bye.